Yeah, you muted yourself. Yeah, you need to unmute yourself. It might be glitching and it causes that sometimes.
Catherine, I'll give you the mic, or Yangtze. Go ahead, Catherine.
I know, I mostly really wanted to hear what she had to say, because I imagine from a legal perspective, it would be a very interesting thing to find out, because I think there's a lot of people who raise that point, really, because once you start looking at, okay, this particular hate symbol, which I think we can very much agree it is a hate symbol, can you say that it incites violence? Well, that becomes an interpretation thing. You can say that a lot of things incite, violence or hate.
Well, I think this is quite blatant, right? This is quite blatant.
A lot of things. Well, but that you saying that's blatant. There's a lot of people who would say there's all these
blatant.
images.
I mean, he said that he denied the Holocaust. First of all, he blames the Jews for everything that's gone wrong in his life, from his mother dying to him losing all of his gifts.
Oh, I am not denying that what he says is incredibly anti-Semitic. Yeah, I mean, I gave him some benefit of the doubt in the beginning, but like there is no benefit of the doubt at this point, and it hasn't been for a while. However, so I don't know, I guess if you take it all in context of everything that he said, but like you really have to define these things. And I think it's particularly interesting, like if you can define this from a legal point of view, which is why it's really interesting to me what maybe Amy had to say, given the position that she has. But like, you have to be very clear about these things, because then it becomes a point of view. And then we're sort of back at that slippery slope that we were at before with Twitter. And then people are complaining about, like, this policy is being implemented, for these people and not for the sake of these people. And then people who say there's trans hate there, and certain things are being banned. And
right,
certain people are saying, well, that's an opinion.
They'll even say that allowing people to question vaccines, for instance, is dangerous. It's against the public health. They would make that argument, right? And it's the slippery slope, kind of, where everything can be violent and everything is not.
Somebody's gender identity can be considered,
right. Like
that's hate, and that's raising people's. But you can say those people also have a point if you start, so like that's really difficult to define. I think it is a very difficult question. And if you don't have very clear sort of guidelines, you get into the same problems. And I think
that's where the rules come in, right? It's not just going to be based on the whims of a single person. I think
then why you need rules.
Specify. And they do.
That's why it's not absolute free speech. Then it's not absolute free speech.
It's not absolute free speech, but I mean, either,
I think you have to remember that Elon also has a brand to protect.
Yeah.
I mean, Twitter is a brand and he does need to protect it. And he also has the media and a lot of people very much against him. So if he is to harbor someone like Kanye here, he's never going to hear the end of it. And it will be used full well against him.
And that's completely fair.
It's not just Kanye as well, right? I mean, it's the fact that if he allows Kanye to say certain things and place favoritism, whereas everybody else gets banned for it, that's going to be an issue, right? And keep in mind, the European Court and the European Union, the European Commission, sorry, not the European Court, the European Commission has talked to Elon about free speech. And where they draw the line on it, right? So he has talked to them about this. I mean, this is just basic stuff, but it's necessary.
Well, I'm not saying, Ian, that he's wrong to have done it necessarily, but you have to create rules and guidelines that actually put that in somehow. So, and it's early days, and he's still figuring it out, but then it is not absolute free speech, which is okay. I'm not saying, because I've sort of gone back and forth.
We can get as close as possible, right? We can get as close as possible.
Yeah, that's fair.
Speech. So that is the idea. You can't have 100% absolute free speech. That would mean, allowing pornographers to be on the platform, putting child porn, like virtual child porn, mind you, because that's legal, right? So you can't have that. You've already scaled back the absolutism of it. But again, this is a private platform that advertisers use. So it is a business after all. So, as much as it pains libertarians to not have their weird shit on here, it's like it doesn't pain anybody else. More people want to use it because I personally, and I think a lot of people in this room wouldn't want to be using a platform that's a free-for-all hellscape. And he has said this multiple times, that Twitter will not turn into a free-for-all hellscape under his guidance. And it actually was before. It was a free-for-all hellscape because they were not, at one point in time, before he took over, not policing child sexual exploitation materials. That was all available. The hashtags were there. People would report things and they would just go unnoticed, right? He, under his guidance, and this he has, actually retweeted somebody earlier who's working on this, they managed to double their daily bans on all these accounts, and in different languages too, because before they would only get English language accounts, not Spanish speaking ones or Filipino or any other language, because those people will be using those types of, those different languages to spread child pornography. And now they actually do have the mechanism in place to police it. And this is all in spite of people saying that Twitter is a more dangerous place. It actually is a safer place.
Could I offer, sorry, could I offer a response? I'm going to give an alternative opinion on the censorship of Kanye, or Ye as he is known now. I'm a free speech absolutist, as I said, except of course in cases of calling for violence or child exploitation, pornography, these kinds of things, which I think is a very moderate position. I do not think Kanye should have been censored. I don't think what he said qualifies as incitement to violence. He never called or even, I think, intimated that any violence he should be carried out, or that he wanted to carry, or that he would. At one point on Twitter, I think he said, "I'm going to go DEFCON 3," or which is kind of vague, maybe could be construed, but ultimately there were no acts carried out that were inspired by him. I didn't. There were all kind of the phony reports about hate speech spiking in the aftermath of Elon Musk taking over Twitter, but Kanye West did not inspire any kind of violence. And people who are going to carry out acts of violence against Jews, and I mean myself, I hate to bring up my identity, but I am Jewish for what it's worth. The attack in Pittsburgh, I mean, that was carried out by like a hardcore white supremacist, not someone who's going to be inspired by Kanye West, right? So the whole ideology of terrorist attacks against Jews or other minority groups is a white supremacist thing, not like a mentally
that is a lie. That I'm going to push back on that. Have you heard of the New Jersey attack, killing I believe they killed 3 or 4 people? The Muncie attack.
Yeah, that's
true. Those were not white supremacists.
Sure,
those are not white supremacists. They were basically the same people who repeat the same lies that that Kanye West talks about every single time he opens his mouth, right? He talks about how he's the real Jewish person, and how these white people, they're just pretend Jews. Like that is the crazy narrative that these people are promoting.
Right.
They're insane, right?
Yeah, no, that's true. There have been, like, I guess, I don't even know what it's like Black Hebrews, I think they're called.
Yeah,
Black
Israelite or whatever. Yeah.
Right. I'm familiar with them. And there's kind of different levels of their group. Some are total whack job extremists, obviously. Some are not. And I'd say many are not.
What's up, y'all?
However,
how's it going?
Point being, when I look at if we use like the European countries as a bar for, well, they banned it, most of the world says that Nazi symbols should be banned. Then
it's banned in Russia. Keep that in mind. A lot of people talk shit about Russia, but like this stuff is banned in Russia. You cannot promote neo-Nazism there.
Right, but
it's not banned in Canada.
But I don't think you guys know how free speech works.
Germany has very strict laws against Nazi symbols, yet they have a very serious Nazi problem. So, or Spain has very serious, the Nazi collaborators, their political party that exists now, their descendants, like the structures that create Nazism, those are all still in place, even in NATO today. And what the U.S. is supporting in Ukraine, open Nazis. So it strikes me as very hollow that there is this push to, it's almost like virtue signal to ban someone that's essentially not really important and doesn't present any threat to Jews in Kanye West. Meanwhile, we are spending billions upon billions of dollars in supporting a Nazi-infested military.
Nazis, yeah. I mean, I understand where you're coming from. I agree with you. I think that a lot of the virtue signal that's coming from the establishment needs to, yeah. Sure, they need to.
Can I suggest, Mario, really quick, really quick momentarily, because Kim.com is on a brief break from the space. Is there any way to drop Ian in as a co-host if you're available to do so, Ian?
I tried. It's not working, unfortunately. I tried like half
Yeah,
an
it
hour
only
ago.
lasts two.
So guys,
Drop in Catherine. Catherine would make a great co-host.
No, I cannot invite anyone as a co-host through the glitches like this. Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah,
Kim rugged me right before I was going to ask Elon a very short logical progression. Rugged is a crypto term for, canceled or removed or whatever.
Did you
I
say
don't know
Kim
why.
did?
Yeah, I don't know why.
Did Kim tell you that he did so?
Well,
Kim said he's going to remove a few people. I think it just removed a few when Elon came on.
yeah.
Okay.
So I'm going to pretend that Elon's still here and just say the same thing now I would have said then. And I don't know, the nice young lady, if she's young, can pretend she's Elon. It'll be a real short exchange. Hey, Elon, would you agree that the only upside to free speech is the chance that society gets better?
As someone who, yes.
Who do you want to?
Yes.
Are you talking to
That's right. That's correct. I agree with you, Elon.
But more free speech doesn't mean more, hate speech, right? It means that
Don't break.
letting people
Yes,
speak
it does
freely.
mean that. It exactly does mean that. But just chill. You're don't break my yes momentum. You're messing up my sales
does
tactics
not
here.
make people feel free. It makes people not want to speak. If you're threatened with violence, why would you open your mouth? I mean, the big reason why we're living in this situation right now is because the internet was
pseudo-anonymity
a
is why.
free-for-all for too long.
Pseudo-anonymity cancels your retribution argument. I could issue my statement without the logical progression, but it's more compelling if you let me finish it. So I just need two more yeses out of you for you to get the idea. All right. So the first idea, the first idea is that the only upside to free speech is that you think society will end up better because of it, as the founders did. Okay, the founders of the Constitution thought it was a good idea. That's why it's in the First Amendment, and there's been very few restrictions put on it. The only restrictions put on it were you can't yell fire in a crowded house.
No, yes, you can. Yes, you can. That was an argument that was actually nonsense that was shot down by the Supreme Court eventually because it was used to suppress trade unionists in the 1910s.
Even better. Well, that's all right. They're still using it to enforce security laws, so maybe the Supreme Court will get around to that at some point.
The Patriot Act needs to be gotten rid of.
No, but different. I mean, like the Securities and Exchange Commission. They're using it to suppress free speech currently. If you have a YouTube channel promoting a cryptocurrency, they're going to send you a very mean subpoena, and then you have to get legal counsel.
A lot of the problem with the crypto community, and I have no hatred towards you guys. I mean, I do invest in crypto. Is that you didn't police yourself properly to a point where scammers like SBF, for instance, were allowed to proliferate, and now there have to be protections just to make sure people don't lose their fucking mortgages, right?
We'll get into that as soon as I finish this simple logical progression. Okay, so step one, we believe that free speech is useful to create superior societies. Okay, step two, why don't you just advertise the ideas that you want to hear? So if you believe that free speech is going to advertise these superior ideals and then those ideals will get adopted, why don't you skip the free speech part and go directly to the ideals? Because I can tell you, and this is the part that isn't the clearest just yes answer, free speech is a poor substitute for advertising superior behaviors. So if you give everyone free speech, you're going to empower a lot of very stupid ideas. And those very stupid ideas do nothing to promote better ideas. So letting Kanye post swastikas, which, by the way, he should 100% be allowed to do based on Elon Musk's own position that Twitter will allow what is legal. When I grew up in the United States, people, the Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, fought very hard to allow Nazis to march and to present their flags. And they're primarily Jewish lawyers. Okay, and they understand that you need free speech for a good functioning society. Yes, it's inferior to advertising better ideas, but it's better than nothing. It's better than the perversion of the power structure. Because basically what happens is the random lottery of human preference gives you a worse governance at some point. And when that worse governance comes into power, you really want them to have less power to screw things up. So like the ability to print money, how's that worked out? Well, they use it to go to war all the time without having to pass a war tax. And so what do you know? The military-industrial complex won. We're at war all the time. We've been blowing up brown people forever to no good result. We've moved a bunch of rocks from one spot to another spot in Iraq. and elsewhere in Afghanistan. And for what? To just make the military industrial complex rich and create more extremists. So it's like, I wrote a book called Sci-Vive that directly advertises superior behaviors. I wrote a book called How to Fix the World, which directly advertises superior behaviors. Had those things got better promoted by me, or better adoption, you'd have a world full of people that were healthier, happier, with better relationships, with more money.
She's good at promotions.
Well, yeah, maybe. But like, I'm just saying, Elon is making a huge mistake in assuming that free speech leads to as good outcomes as just advertising directly for you want. So there's other people on the other side that, like Soros. George Soros chucks hundreds of millions of dollars a year at things that a lot of Americans don't like. So, like, for instance, immigration would be one of them, you know?
Sure, yeah.
And people say, like, oh, America was built on immigrants. You're like, yeah, but you don't have to let the worst one in, right? Like Australia has actually done a pretty good job with their point system of making sure that the immigrants that they get have
Denmark
the qualities that they would prefer.
Denmark and Switzerland, not Sweden, Switzerland and Singapore have done a fantastic job with immigration. They do allow a lot of immigrants in, but they have to be vetted, right? No criminal records. Yeah.
And the other thing is, like, people, there's so many things that you get cancel cultured for saying that I think I won't get canceled with. So like my first 2 YouTube videos I did were on the difference between men and women. We're obviously different. We've evolved to be different. We have a term for it called sexual dimorphism. The men are literally twice as strong without lifting, and then if they lift, they remain twice as strong. And we're supposed to celebrate diversity. And if you're going to celebrate diversity, diversity has to exist. And it quite simply means difference. And then these idiots come along and think they've figured it out better than a million years of evolution. And they want to pretend that everything's the same. And you're like, nope, everything's not the same, and you're dumb. And the rest of the animal kingdom thinks you're dumb. And you're really just a smart shaved monkey. Stop pretending that we don't have differences built into us. So I'm okay with feeling like I'm not going to get canceled for saying that. Here's another one I think I'm not going to get canceled for. So I'm happy to talk about it.
I'm canceling you right now. But you know what? I will say the men and women difference. I've realized how different men and women are when I started taking jiu-jitsu. I will never win against a man who has the same experience.
There you go. Yeah, reality is the son of a bitch. Reality is like really racist too. You're like, wait a second, races are different? Yeah, I dare you. Have you ever been playing football? I grew up in Miami. I played American football. I was getting annihilated by black dudes because they got so much bigger, stronger, quicker, and you're getting just totally blown out as soon as they say hut. And then you go and look at sports, and you're like, wait a second, why is everyone black in sports except swimming? Oh, because they're better at sports. So why don't we not pretend that they're not? And then you go look at smarts, and you're like, why do the Jewish people do all the science, all the comedy writing, all the script writing, all the banking, all the invention? You're like, yeah, they're the smartest people per capita in the world. Like, let's not pretend that they're not. Somehow, like, ignoring reality and ignoring measurements became...
But it's interesting because you can say that, and there's a really big difference between saying that, which is, it's fine, you're acknowledging something, versus like what somebody like Kanye, whatever said, which is, you know, it's like what's the problem with that? There is no problem with that.
Well, no, Elon said you should be able to do whatever is legal on Twitter. Kanye did something legal and got removed. So Elon didn't follow his own rules. Now, look, maybe it's so early in the game. He doesn't feel comfortable actually following his own rules. He didn't feel like eating the backlash right now. He got too many other things going on. Fine. It's still good progress. But is it really...
But you know what? We have Amy back, and I would love to hear from her because she is policy and legal at Parler. So I imagine she deals with a lot of this kind of stuff. So I'd love to hear what she has to say about this topic.
Okay, I'm hoping this is going to work now. Thanks for letting me back in. Okay, excellent. Yep. So, you know, at Parler, what we try to do is have our policy animated by the First Amendment. Now, you're not going to be able to apply First Amendment law completely across the board in the context of a private business, where you want to make money. And one of the things that Elon said earlier was that he is conscious of the advertisers and their wishes with respect to having their ads next to certain types of material or not. And of course, if you do have the wonderful technology that, Twitter is, I'm not going to be saying anything surprising here. It's more technically sophisticated than Parler is, right? If you have the technical sophistication to be able to implement the wishes of your advertisers with respect to the juxtaposition of the content, that's a beautiful thing. And of course, it's a perfectly valid business interest, right? So, while you can have an idea that you're a First Amendment or a free speech absolutist, that there's going to be things like spam and bots. Another thing that we try to do at Parler, at least on Parler.com, we do this because Apple and Google do not allow it. We put the control over things like hate speech, so-called hate speech, in the hands of the individual user. And really that is what I think would be a principled way to implement free speech absolutism, which is that as much as possible, you put control over all legal speech in the hands of the individual users. And we saw Jack was going to be groping at this in Twitter, and they were doing this with Blue Sky. And perhaps Mr. Musk is going to implement those things at Twitter as well. And that would be a good way to do it. With regard to the effectiveness of censoring so-called hate speech, I highly, highly recommend a book by Nadine Strawson. She is the former head of the ACLU, and she wrote a book called Hate: Why It Should Be Resisted with Free Speech, Not Censorship. And she talks about the fact that in Europe, where they do have these anti-hate speech laws, that they really are, I think Richard was talking about this, that they are not effective at all. So again, with respect to content moderation online, I really do try to follow First Amendment, which would be the emergency principle that you would take down speech only when it's a rights violation that is either a fait accompli with the material itself, such like child pornography or fraud or intellectual property theft, etc. Of course, threats or incitement. But you would want to leave it up unless there's some sort of concrete, serious, imminent risk of harm that can't be ameliorated by other means, right? Now, with respect to the Ye tweets, first of all, I thought Elon had the patience of a saint that other night because I was watching the thread myself. He said that with respect to the swastika, he found that to be inciting. And I could see it maybe within a context. And if you heard him earlier, he mentioned the fact that that swastika that was shared in the context of him praising Hitler. And in particular, so if you're praising Hitler, you're praising Hitler's actions, you're praising the Holocaust and the extermination, the mass extermination of the Jewish people. So I think if you look at the context, right, go back to, Trump had that video when he was actually saying, "I love you" to the people who were storming the Capitol. When have you ever heard the phrase "I love you" potentially be considered incitement? But maybe in that particular context, it would be, right? So we have to think about context. You're going to think about the fact that it is a business, and the other thing, what is the purpose of the business? He says the purpose, of course, is that he wants to further productive discussion, further grasping towards the truth. And one thing that is true is that if there's threats of force, that stops all productive discussion. You're wrong. Why? Because I'm going to beat you up. This is an old Aristotelian ad baculum, right? So there are purposes that are in line with the, furthering of productive discussion, groping towards truth, etc. That if you err a little bit on the side of removing something that's in context, you could see doing that. Anyway, so that's my 2 cents on that. It was a tough call for him to make. Clear to say that he wasn't making it based on Ye posting pictures of him or etc. So that was funny as well. Do you mind if I say a couple things about the stuff I wanted to say, which is more legal in topic? I have a couple things to say about regulation of social media platforms in general, a little bit about Section 230, and even a bit about Privacy Patriot Act. Can I indulge myself and speak a bit more? Is that okay with you?
Yeah, of course. I'll let other speakers just to jump in and comment on what you said, and then I'll give you the mic back.
I didn't hear anything back.
I was just going to say, Amy, that was really insightful.
Okay, I'm going to keep talking until you kick me out then. So kick me out because I can't hear you. Okay, so on.
Go ahead, Catherine. Oh, she just dropped out. Let me invite Amy again. So I've just dropped her up and invite her again. So it fixes it.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Oh, I think she can't hear other people.
Can't hear any of us, and she dropped
out. She still shows up as a speaker for me, but
no, she says she dropped out.
I'm bringing her up. Don't worry. I removed her. Yeah, I removed her and bringing her up because when that glitch happens, she can't hear anyone anymore.
Well, all right. Well, I'll just respond to what she said. She said in the meantime. Well, I just thought that was insightful because I guess just in the way that it can be interpreted, I can sort of see how it can be interpreted such if you take all of the context. So that's kind of an interesting way of looking at it. I am interested in what she has to say on the legal side as well. But yeah, it's just a lot of food for thought. But I think it's kind of still early days, and I think he's still defining. I do think it's interesting because I saw his tweets where he said, that picture that he tweeted of him and the airplane. He said, "This is okay, and this is not okay," which was the sort of the hateful symbol. But I think
it was a swastika. A lot of people are saying, "Well, it's the Raelians." It's like, well, the Raelians haven't used that symbol in years.
No,
decades,
that's a BS. That is a BS argument, and the people who are making it, and then they're like, "Well,
disingenuous," and that's the problem with a lot of people, right? They're going to make the disingenuous argument and be like, "Actually, he's promoting Raelianism." No, he's not. Come on, use a brain,
No, I mean, there's a lot of disingenuous arguments. There's a lot of people who also just, they love this kind of speech, and that they really do want to see that, right? And so but unfortunately, I think Elon still has to kind of figure out. I think these things are so complex that it's almost very difficult to sort of distill that into a policy and put that on paper because people will be upset if it's not to the word. Yeah, go ahead, Amy.
I would say the principles are clear, but their application within a particular context can be very difficult. And at Parler, we actually have a community jury made of Parler users, and we give them trainings, we teach them the principles, and we have them weigh in and give us their reasoning on particular cases before we make final decisions.
So
and
like a jury.
Yeah, no, like a real jury. We find it very helpful. So can I give my 2-minute spiel on those other topics, please? Oh, please, because the other topics are really a lot of my passion. So, earlier we were talking about potential regulation of social media and maybe turning social media platforms into public utilities and treating them that way. And I just ask people when I think about this topic to think about how we got into the bad place that we are. And it is because we've seen this intertwining between big tech, so-called tech, and big government, right? You have this intertwining of government bureaucrats and social media platforms. And I think that if you institute regulation of the platforms, and it doesn't matter in what form you call it, you're going to call them public utilities, or you're going to amend Section 230 in certain ways and require them to have certain transparency or certain types of content moderation, whatever it is that you're going to do, you're just going to further intertwine government and tech platforms, and that's going to result in more censorship and a closer step towards, again, making Orwell 1984 a reality. It's not supposed to be an instruction manual. So whenever you're looking at these problems, I would always try to solve them via litigation, via the courts, because I see the courts, a court case, as a way to surgically remove a cancer, such as an intertwining between government and Twitter, for example. You go in and you figure out exactly what happened. You institute, things that make sure it's not going to happen again. But you do that because what you do is you impose a remedy. You give a remedy to the person who was wronged by this, and you find them guilty of potentially a constitutional violation. Now, how can you do this with Section 230? I do not think you need to amend Section 230. If you go out and look at the case of Malwarebytes versus Enigma, Justice Clarence Thomas wrote a statement in which he describes a narrower interpretation of Section 230, which would allow courts to hold accountable the platforms for their contribution to the content, whether they actually labeled the content, edited the content, produced the content themselves. Maybe they boosted the content in a way so that it got bigger reach, or maybe they deplatformed somebody. Whatever their contribution to the content is, they can be held accountable for it under a narrower interpretation of Section 230. Section 230 gives legal immunity to platforms for removing objectionable content, but it has to be done in good faith. And it is not good faith for a platform to help government bureaucrats do an end run around the First Amendment, right? That is not good faith. So certainly they can be held accountable for that. And I would always recommend litigation over legislation, over regulation. So as much as I like Texas and Florida and their governors, I think they mean well. I don't think they should be telling platforms even that the platforms cannot remove people, or for political reasons or whatever, because any statute that regulates the platforms can be construed in this way or that. It could be used as a way to threaten the platforms to do their bidding. And that's why I was also skeptical about the European legislation that Mr. Musk discussed earlier, because even if he agrees with all the things he thinks that it requires the platforms to do, he thinks a good business would do that. My concern is that it could be construed in ways to put pressure on the platforms and to make them do their bidding. Any of these laws that are in the books are going to be twisted by whoever is in power to try to achieve censorship in favor of their narratives. That's my concern there. And then finally, on the privacy topic, people were talking about the Patriot Act. And of course, there's so many things that, where the government has their claws into social media. Maybe there's backdoors in certain places. Certainly, they're able to request, information from social media in ways that seem like they shouldn't be entitled to it. All of this goes back way further than the Patriot Act. If you go back to the Smith and Miller Supreme Court cases in the 1970s, those are telephone and banking cases. These are cases under the so-called third-party doctrine. And the third-party doctrine just says simply that if you share information with a third party, like a social media company, like a bank, et cetera, if you share that information, you no longer have a reasonable expectation of privacy in that information. And so therefore, it no longer enjoys the Fourth Amendment protection of the warrant requirement. And this means the government can get it without probable cause, without particularized suspicion. So the Patriot Act and all of the bulk surveillance programs that Edward Snowden revealed back in 2013, all of those are supposedly legal because of this third-party doctrine and the way that this doctrine was expanded in the 1970s under the Smith and Miller cases. Now, I've spoken too long already, but in an article that I wrote for the St. John's Law Review, it's linked in my bio here on Twitter. I'm that much of a geek, okay? In that article, I talked about a way nerd. I know, big nerd.
No, big respect.
No.
Honestly, big respect. I mean, you are at the top of your game. Respect.
Nerds run the world.
No, so in that article, what I do is I outline a way to overturn those Smith and Miller cases. I mean, if you thought Roe versus Wade was a big overturn, imagine overturning two cases that would make law enforcement get a warrant for information shared with a third party. That would be huge. Law enforcement these days feels that they are entitled to any data that you share with any third party. And I'll give you the solution in brief, because it's very simple, okay? When you share information with a third party, you're sharing it pursuant to a contract. You're making a contract. Now, the third party doctrine originally arose in something called the secret agent cases. And the secret agent cases are cases like, you can imagine Tony Soprano. He's in his basement with his co-conspirators. They're talking about a drug deal or an assassination hit or something that they're contemplating. And of course, part of their agreement is that they're going to keep all the information they share with each other private. The secret agent cases said that in that context, when you share that information, that if the other guy turned government informant, that the government didn't need a warrant to get that information from them. The guy can just turn it over. Those were the secret agent cases. That is how the third party doctrine existed all the way from the 1920s up until the 1970s with the Smith and Miller cases. In the Smith and Miller cases, those involved just normal, ordinary contracts with people and their service providers. Again, this is your phone, this is your bank. These are not these old types of criminal conspiracies, the secret agent cases. Now, in the common law, there was a doctrine called illegal contract. Under the common law, if you had an illegal contract, a contract, the primary purpose of which was to achieve a criminal end, that contract was unenforceable, completely unenforceable at common law. All the promises made according to that contract, unenforceable. So it seems reasonable that if it's a criminal conspiracy, again, think Tony Soprano, their entire agreement is unenforceable. They couldn't go into a court of law and enforce that agreement, and nor can they expect a court of law to enforce their agreement with each other to keep the stuff private. That's how the third party doctrine arose. And in my view, the Supreme Court had no business extending the scope of that doctrine in the 1970s to ordinary contracts between customers and service providers, like their phones, like their banks. You and I, we are not criminals. We are not Tony Soprano. When we have contracts with Twitter, when we have contracts with Facebook, when we have contracts with our phone service providers, et cetera, we expect, and we reasonably expect, that the information that we share with those providers is private, that it's kept private unless the government produces a warrant. So that is in essence my solution. This is why the Smith and Miller cases should be overturned. And like I said, you can read the article if you want to geek out. It's not very long. It's about 14 pages or something, but it's in my bio here on Twitter. And you know, were that to actually happen, which I think could happen under a Gorsuch and a Thomas, a lot of things would really change. And I think we'd have a lot more privacy. I would call it legalizing privacy, because you could once again use your rights to contract and property to protect your privacy again. That's how it used to be.
Thank sorry, you. That was extremely insightful. No, it's fine. It's all good. Thank you. Like, that gives us a good legal perspective of this whole situation, right? I mean, it's not simple. It's not as easy as saying, oh, I want to ban this versus this. It's like, no, there's a lot of legal hurdles to go over, and you don't want to break those laws. You want to make sure that you are abiding by, you know, you're abiding by your own principles, but at the same time, you're also abiding by the law. Right, you're running a massive platform here, and the last thing you want to do is lose those, you know, Section 230 privileges. That's a big thing.
No, definitely. And you know, the principle behind Section 230 is 100% correct, because what does it say? It says there is such thing as a platform, and that a platform is not the publisher. It's the users who generate the content, who produce the content. They are the publishers, and they are the ones who are properly held liable as publishers. But all that Clarence Thomas has now said is that don't take that principle too far, that to the extent platforms do contribute to the content, even if they're boosting its reach or throttling its reach, et cetera, that they could potentially be held liable for those contributions to the content, fact checking, labeling, all those things too.
Yep. That's exactly correct.
Ian, I want to digress to another question. Sorry, I'm eating, man. If you don't mind.
Yeah. Go for it.
What information do we have about the next drops? The next information drop. When should we expect it? Is it any minute? We have no idea.
It could be any minute now. It could be later tonight because Elon did promise tomorrow being today, but it's in Matt Taibbi's hands, right? It's out of Elon's hands right now. This is a Matt Taibbi drop, so it could come at any moment. We don't know yet, so we just gotta wait. We gotta stay up all night, and that's terrible if you want to go out. But
Ian stays up all night anyways. Like, let's be honest here. Ian does not sleep.
I do think it's
right?
happening. I do think it's happening. Yeah, no, I don't sleep. Yeah, I barely sleep.
And what do we expect, Ian? What is speculative?
What can we expect? I mean, he hasn't really given any, he hasn't given any specifics, but judging from what he said earlier, he was talking about journalists and how they're all attacking him and they're attacking Elon Musk for releasing these documents and how they're, trying to protect their narrative. So he did call them out, and he did link to one of the articles that written about how the journalists collude with social media platforms to censor people, right? That's a great article. You should check it out. It's on his timeline. So I think maybe that's a hint as to what's coming. I could be wrong, but that is the only hint that we've got so far.
I'd like to see something specific coming, personally, if I may, Mario. I would love to see, I mean, we all know that the COVID narrative has been a big one that has been censored specifically by, a lot of different organizations, I imagine. And I think just knowing how that was done and specifically, the rules and the guidelines and whose voice was allowed and whose was not, I think that would be a very meaningful Twitter thread drop at some point. I don't think that's the next one that's coming because I just think there's no indication there. But I think that's probably, it would be huge, and it would be, I think we talked about this, it would be like very international as well. So it wouldn't be just American.
If it involves like Pfizer or international governments, like for instance, the Australian government or the New Zealand government, what have they suppressed, right? I mean, we know they suppressed things. They have done this publicly, quite openly, suppressed anyone talking about these issues. I mean, we saw ZeroHedge got banned for a few months because they reported, contrary to the popular narrative, that COVID had come from a lab. And now today itself, we had confirmation from someone who worked at EcoHealth Alliance. That's in the New York Post right now. It's a breaking story, right?
What's a breaking story? What's a breaking story? The lab theory is getting
one of the scientists at EcoHealth Alliance, he came out and he said, yes, COVID was engineered in a lab. And this is one of the guys who was a part of that organization that worked at with the scientists at the biological, the virological lab, the WIV, right, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, right? So he has confirmed that it is in fact a human engineered virus, right? It's based on a bad coronavirus.
Oh, wow.
Quite different from
and I think
has he provided any evidence on that, or is just, I know he's in a position where his claims should be taken seriously, but has he given any evidence to back up his claims beyond?
I haven't looked too much into it. I've been quite busy with this lately, but he has tweeted quite a bit about it.
That would be, I swear, if that turns out to be, if there's any facts to prove this now or in a few years' time, that would allow me to question a lot of beliefs I have. That would be insane if they manage, because I find it. I'm under the belief. And rightly so. I think to an extent, it's you'd agree, is that hiding information in today's age is so difficult because it's so easy to be a whistleblower. It's so easy to leak information where some of the most powerful people get their documents leaked. We've had all these different documents.
Not so much in China, though, I think.
Yeah. Oh, unless you leave China and then you could leak information. Like we've had people
do that, yeah. And actually, one of them was banned, right? Was banned by Twitter. She was one of the scientists who worked at the laboratory. She left China to talk about it, about how she had basically participated in this, and she was originally banned when she started tweeting about it. She made a second account. I forget what her name is, but I'm sure you can look it up on Google.
I've asked, by the way, I can see your hand up, Jason. Jason, you can just jump in anytime, man, because Twitter's glitching, so I might not see your hand. And And anyone else, if you're requesting to speak, just DM me, and then we know the team is checking my DMs. We can't see requests.
I think what's really important about this particular narrative, though, because it doesn't really matter what you believe specifically about COVID, whether you're a huge vaccine fanatic and you love all the boosters or not, it really doesn't matter. What matters is like the narrative and who controls the flow of information, how it's done, on what basis, and this kind of idea that it's for your own good. And we were talking about this earlier with Ian. It's like this idea, like literally people justify this by thinking, well, this is for the greater good because this is a life and death situation